Okay, and there's my little face floating. All right. So we're going to start with an ask the audience question. Has your business suffered a data breach? So a data breach is going to be any sort of incident that involves the unauthorized disclosure or access of confidential or sensitive information. So I'll give you a few moments to answer. Okay, great. So 21% of you have said yes, 56% no, and then 23% don't know. Okay, so we do have some in the audience that are familiar with a data breach. Some of you that have not had to deal with that. So that's great. I think if Benjamin Franklin were alive today, he would probably say that nothing can be said to be certain except death, taxes, and a cyber attack. It's not really a matter of if you will be subject to a cyber attack, but when. These threats are becoming more and more common in the workplace. So we're going to walk through why cybersecurity is important, some common security threats in the workplace, some safeguards that you can implement with policies and procedures, and employee best practices. I do realize this is an HR audience, so we're really going to be focusing on your employees and personnel that can subject your company to a cybersecurity threat. We're not going to focus too much on the technical side of things. I'm not an IT expert, so if you have technical questions, I would recommend you direct those to your IT department. So some cyber stats. The average cost of a data breach in 2020 was $3.86 million. Of that cost, the average cost of lost business was $1.5 million. The average time to identify and contain a data breach is 280 days. So that's a long time for a hacker or a cyber criminal to be filtering your systems, downloading sensitive and personal information, and then potentially encrypting that information and locking you out of those systems. So 280 days is a significant time for someone to, with a nefarious mind to steal your data. This graph will show you the average cost of a breach by organizational size. So I think my head's in the way for some of this, but as you can see, starting with the left, your smaller organizations, the average cost is going to be about 2.35 million, and they tend to go up the larger the organization is. What's interesting though is that smaller organizations are disproportionately impacted in terms of costs by a data breach because they tend to have less revenue than an organization that's going to have like 25,000 or more employees. So I mentioned earlier, the average cost of a data breach is 3.86 million. So these are the cost centers that are considered in determining that number. Detection and escalation is going to run about on average $1.1 million. This is going to include costs to hire forensic analysis and do an investigation, assessments and audits, and managing the crisis. Your biggest cost, again, is going to be lost business. So this is going to be business disruption, system downtimes, loss of customers, and your inability to acquire customers in the future, and obviously some reputational damages to the company. Notification is going to run about $250,000. Anytime you suffer a data breach, you're likely going to have to notify the affected individuals. If you're a regulated industry, like in healthcare or finance, you're going to have to notify those regulators as well. And you'll probably want to hire some outside experts to help you determine what sort of notices are required to not just individuals, but to regulators. And then you'll also want to consult just state by state laws Some laws will require you to notify the state attorney general's office. And then ex post response is going to run you on average $1 million. This is going to involve credit monitoring for the affected individuals, the legal costs to help you determine what sort of notification requirements are involved. And then there we go, regulatory fines. If you are a regulated industry, you're likely going to be subject to some penalties. What's interesting is what's not considered in these cost centers is any sort of litigation after the fact. So you could be subject to consumer class action lawsuits. If you have, for example, a privacy policy on your website and you make certain guarantees about the security of data in your privacy policy, you could also be within the jurisdiction of the Federal Trade Commission. And they can assess some penalties and require you to undergo some significant remediation to protect the security of that data from future breaches. Okay, so let's get into some common threats in the workplace. Social engineering is probably going to be the biggest issue in terms of your employees. So in a social engineering campaign, you're going to have a hacker that's trying to probably impersonate someone else to trick you into giving you their information or access to your software or data. They tend to rely on human emotions. And so there's some common tactics that these folks will use in a social engineering campaign. One of the biggest ones is phishing and smishing campaigns. So phishing is going to be one of the most common social engineering campaigns that hackers will use. So again, they're going to use a false identity to try to trick someone into giving sensitive information or download malware. The classic scam might be, and you may have seen this in your personal life, you get an email from what looks like to be your bank, and there's a link embedded in that email. And so you click on the link and it actually takes you to a website that looks like your bank's website, but it's actually a website that's hosted by the cyber criminal. And if you put in your login credentials, the cyber criminal now has access to your account. So it's important not to click on links and suspicious emails. Best practice would be to just go to your bank's website directly. So you're not actually putting in your credentials from a link that you've clicked in an email. More sophisticated phishing schemes will aim to get their victims to download malware. So they want you to just infiltrate your own device. And we'll talk about a really common malware threat that's been increasing in the cybersecurity industry. Spear phishing is another type of phishing campaign. So in spear phishing, a hacker is going to probably look at maybe information that you have on your company's website about individuals or senior leadership. They'll also look at LinkedIn pages, and they're going to try to look like or impersonate like a coworker, for example. So it may be an email you get that purports to be from the finance department, trying to get you to disclose account information or to rush a really urgent check or wire transfer. So that's what we call spear phishing. And then in the cyber security world, we also have a term called whaling. That's where a cyber criminal is going to try and catch a whale, like the C-suite. So they're going to try to target your CEOs, your CFOs, maybe your board of directors. But it's a bigger catch, so to speak. So it's referred to as whaling in the industry. And then smishing campaigns. So this is where you may receive like an SMS text message. And in that text message, I've been getting them a lot. You probably have too. It's a weird text message from an unknown number, and it may be someone purporting to be your bank. And it may say something like, oh, your password has been compromised. Please click on this link to change your password. Once you click on that link, it could download some sort of malware to your device. So anytime you get a text message that contains links, I recommend not clicking on those links. If it's purporting to be a bank, or one that I've been getting a lot lately is my delivery will be delayed until I click on this link and verify some information. Those are all going to likely be very nefarious links that will download some sort of malware onto your device. PDF scams. So this is a common threat, and the goal is to get you to open a PDF that's attached to an email. But the PDF is actually embedded with malicious code. And so it could expose your device to malware. A lot of times our brains associate PDFs with legitimate business purposes. And so we're more likely to download a PDF. So always be on the, a little healthy paranoia, like I said, about the emails you receive. If it's from someone who's unrecognized, I would be very suspicious about clicking on a PDF or downloading it. You're in the HR industry. So if you are, recruiting in your HR role, a lot of times this scam can present itself as someone who's a job seeker and they've attached their PDF to the email. Again, just be a little bit paranoid about whether or not it's prudent to download that PDF. Okay, asking the audience. So have you ever reused the same password across multiple accounts? Give you a few seconds to submit your responses. Yes. Oh, wow. 91%. I honestly thought it was going to be 100. So for the 9% of you that said no, kudos to you. I know I've been guilty of it in the past. Why is this important? Credential stuffing. So this is a significant threat that is on the rise. So essentially what credential stuffing means, so an attack is going to be geared towards stealing user credentials. A lot of times I think we've probably all been the victim of some company's data breach. And sometimes in those breaches, these hackers will get access to your credentials, so your username and your password. What they'll do is they'll take this information and then they will use bots to exploit your login credentials that have been stolen from a compromised account. And they'll just, they can really scale the operations and try to access multiple different accounts based on these stolen credentials. In 2020, 1 out of 5 breaches were because of stolen or compromised credentials. So it's really important that we're not reusing the same username and password across our accounts. You really want to have a unique password for each individual account. Make sure it's a really strong password that has several characters, numbers, and symbols. So again, best recommendation here is to utilize different passwords throughout all of your different accounts. I know it can get difficult to keep all that information straight with all of the various passwords we have, but you definitely want to make sure you're not reusing those passwords. Okay, ransomware. So this is a really common malware threat that's on the rise. You may have over the last year seen in the news a significant number of companies that have suffered ransomware attacks. I know in the healthcare industry in November and December of 2020, numerous organizations were subject to a ransomware attack. So what happens in a ransomware attack, it typically arises from a phishing campaign. So someone has turned over their credentials, likely, and now this individual has access to all of the systems and information that that individual had. And so they will, and again, remember what we said at the beginning, 280 days to detect and contain a security breach. They are spending a significant amount of time going through your systems and your data. A lot of times they are downloading this information, and then they will lock you out of your files or systems and demand a ransom payment before they release it. What's unfortunate about these sort of attacks is if you pay the ransom, there is no guarantee that you're going to get access to your systems again. And then there's also no guarantee that they're not going to just dump this data back onto the dark web. So a lot of times we've seen organizations pay the ransom and their data was still dumped into the dark web. So again, you want to be sure that you're not clicking on links in suspicious emails or opening like PDFs because a lot of times you're downloading malware that can subject you to a ransomware attack. Accidental sharing, we probably have all at some point in our lives accidentally sent information to the wrong individual. Maybe you sent a text to the wrong person. In the business world, a lot of times we see this through email. A lot of us just get, sometimes we can get lazy, or maybe we're a little fatigued at the end of the day, and we just are putting in an email address and it auto-populates an email address that might be the wrong email. And so you inadvertently share maybe confidential or sensitive information to the wrong person. So if you have inadvertently shared, let's say it's a spreadsheet with a lot of confidential or sensitive employee data, like employees' names, date of birth, social security numbers, if that goes to the wrong person, this is going to be considered a data breach. So you're going to want to look at the state laws for whether or not this is some sort of breach notifying event that you need to notify affected individuals. And you may also need to notify the state AG's office in these sort of incidents. And then corporate sabotage. So typically this occurs when you have a disgruntled employee and they want to get back at the company. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll use their access to make unauthorized changes to your systems. They may spy for your competitors and send sensitive information about the organization, trade secrets, intellectual property, customer lists to competitors. And they may just also release confidential information into the public domain. In 2018, Tesla was subject to corporate sabotage by a disgruntled employee. This employee changed code to their operation systems and then also exported sensitive data to third parties. And the motive for doing so, this employee was mad that they didn't get a promotion. So obviously this individual probably would not get promoted at that point. You want to have protocols in place when you are going to separate with employees. Most of the time, corporate sabotage will occur before or right after separation of employment. So maybe look at your policies and see whether or not it's prudent to start disabling access to sensitive information when an employee puts their notice in. So those are just some common cybersecurity threats in the workplace that you want to make sure your employees are aware of. Let's talk about some safeguards you can implement. So in the healthcare industry, we like to, the HIPAA rule requires us to follow administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. I think these are just good categories of information to think about for any industry when you're developing your cybersecurity program. So your administrative safeguards, these are going to be policies and procedures designed to manage the conduct of your employees. Physical safeguards are going to be measures you take to protect like physical access, such as your buildings, your equipment, your network servers, if you have physical network servers and you're not cloud-based. And then technical safeguards. So these are safeguards to protect the technology and the information that rests on that technology. So in terms of some policies and procedures to consider with your administrative safeguards, role-based access controls. So ideally, you only give the amount of information, the least amount of information necessary to that an employee needs to perform their work. It would be best if you were able to integrate all of your systems with your HR system. That way, the employee's title in the HR system is tied to access to certain systems. So developing policies and procedures about what systems are necessary based on the employee's role. Password policies, it's important to have password policies. You want to make sure these policies ensure that your employees are implementing strong passwords. Again, you want to have at least 12 characters, numbers, and symbols required in that password. It's prudent to require password changes at least every 90 days, maybe a shorter time frame if you deal with super sensitive data like protected health information. And then just making sure that if your password has been compromised, your policy informs the employees what to do in the event of a compromise of their password. Security incident procedures. So these policies and procedures will just give the employee an idea of what the security incident response looks like. So if you know that, let's say you think you might have been the victim of a phishing attack, these policies and procedures can help an employee determine, who do they need to report the incident to, and then the steps that need to be taken to contain that sort of incident. Workforce security training. Your policies and procedures should include information about training the workforce and the frequency of that training. Ideally, your employees are being trained upon hire periodically, and then in the event you make any sort of like major changes to your operations or systems, making sure your employees are trained on those security protocols. And then contingency plans. You should have contingency plans in case there's an emergency. If you live on the coast, you want to make sure you have plans in place in the event of a hurricane or your systems go down. And these are the sort of things that you should be training your workforce on as well, so they know how to handle these sort of emergencies when they arise. When it comes to security incident response, studies have shown that you're going to reduce your cost of a breach by more than $1 million if you have a security incident response plan and you've worked through that plan with your employees. So cost savings there. Technical safeguards. Okay, so this is going to be policies and procedures for the technology that you have and its use. You want to make sure that your devices have up-to-date antivirus software and firewalls. A lot of us are remote these days, and so you want to make sure that the device that you're using, maybe at home, has up-to-date antivirus software. If you see the little indicator on your computer that your software is out of date, please reach out to your IT department. They can usually remote into your desktop or laptop and update that software for you if it's not automated. Multi-factor or two-factor authentication. So this is a good practice to implement. So when you have multi-factor or two-factor authentication, anytime you're trying to log into a device, maybe it's from a new IP address, or maybe you're just trying to log into your email from a different device, it's important to have multi-factor and two-factor authentication to make sure that the person logging in is actually that individual. A lot of times we see this with our phones, and so you'll get a text message with a code, and then you need to put that code into the system before it allows you to have access to that system. So that's just an additional measure that is recommended. Data encryption, very prudent to encrypt your data. You want to encrypt it at rest. So when it's, sitting on your servers or on the cloud. And then you want to make sure you encrypt it in transit through some sort of email encryption software, especially if you're dealing with sensitive data, account numbers, and employee personal identification information, or protected health information. You want to make sure that data is encrypted. Remote wipe is something that you could also implement. This will allow you to remote wipe a device in the event of theft or loss. A lot of times these devices do need to be online, so that does make it difficult to remote wipe if it's a lost device that doesn't get online. But in terms of the healthcare industry, this is an important thing to have in the event of a theft of a laptop that might have PHI on the device. And then mobile device management software. A lot of us use our own personal devices, whether it's a cell phone or a laptop. If you have a bring your own device policy, it would be prudent to implement mobile device management. This allows your IT security team to monitor your personal device, and they can make sure you're following your IT security protocols. And then also it has the ability to remote wipe information in the event of loss or theft. And then physical safeguards, you want to make sure that you have physically protected your buildings. So it would be prudent to put in a system where you have a badge that you're badging in and out of the buildings. This prevents unauthorized access. If you have physical servers on your location, you want to make sure that wherever they're located, that's also secure, and only the individuals that have a need to access your servers should be the ones granted access. So if you have a badging system to get in and out of the building, I wouldn't grant access to everyone with access to the building to your physical servers. Probably just your IT department would be necessary for that. Equipment as well, you may want to think about whether or not it's important to put cable locks on your laptops. So that's another way to that's another physical safeguard that you can implement. Privacy screens on your computers. As you guys are in the HR department, you're dealing with a lot of sensitive information. So it may make sense to put a privacy screen on your monitors to filter out the sensitive data from others. Workstation security, implementing policies and procedures to secure your workstation. Again, this can be done with cable locks. Also, encouraging your employees that they need to log out of their device when they step away from their device. Anytime you need to leave your desk to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee or whatnot, log out of your device. We don't want people with unauthorized access to your device and systems to be gaining that access because you left your device unlocked. And disposal of data, if you still have paper documents on hand that have sensitive information, once it's time to destroy those documents pursuant to your retention policies, shredding those documents or burning those documents is a best practice. If you need to destroy hardware, pulverizing hardware is also recommended. Okay, so we went through some safeguards. Now it's time to ask the audience again. Does your company require cybersecurity training? Yes. Okay. 68% answered yes. 5% said, I don't know. So probably not. If you don't know, you probably would have taken it. And then more than a quarter of you said no. So, you may not have a formal cybersecurity training within your organization, but you can start implementing maybe some lunch and learns with your employees just to go over some best practices. This could be something that you do maybe once a quarter, maybe, every 6 months. But it's really important to just remind your employees what sort of best practices to look out for, to make sure they're not doing anything that's going to subject the company to a data breach. So what are some best practices for your employees? Education on avoiding unknown emails, links, and pop-ups. Again, phishing is a very common way for hackers to gain access to your systems. Take caution with attachments and links and emails from unrecognized senders. Never ever enter your password credentials in an email or pop-ups or from a link that you clicked in an email. Again, if you have some suspicious email from your bank, for example, go directly to the bank's website. Don't click on that link. And again, never share your password credentials in an email. Use strong passwords. I read a stat that 45% of people actually use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password. That's almost half the population, which is crazy. You should require strong passwords that contain at least 12 characters, consisting of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Again, change those passwords regularly and don't use the same password across multiple accounts. Use secure Wi-Fi. This wasn't as big of a deal when everyone was coming into the office. A lot of times you would typically use your office Wi-Fi, which is secured by a password. Yeah, password 99, not a good idea, Mike. Now a lot of us are remote, and so we're trusting that our employees are utilizing their own Wi-Fi. You want to make sure though that you want to ensure your employees are doing this first of all. So I always say inspect what you expect. Hopefully your employees aren't bumming off of their neighbor's Wi-Fi that's unsecured. And then also, I've been guilty of this when you get your router and Wi-Fi installed, it has like a 30 character long password to enter into for the Wi-Fi. Make sure you change that password. So you can go into whoever is your service provider, you can go into your account and actually change that password. So make sure you're not using the Wi-Fi password that's plastered on the side of your router. Require data encryption. Again, especially if you have employees that are going to be sending sensitive data, make sure they have encryption on their email. And that they're utilizing the encryption anytime they're sending sensitive data. And then talk to your IT department about making sure your data is secure at rest. If you're in a regulated industry like healthcare and you have individuals using devices, those devices have to be encrypted. Anytime you lose a device that's not encrypted in healthcare, you're likely going to have to notify any individuals whose PHI may be on that laptop, in addition to the OCR, which is the regulatory agency in healthcare. And then make sure you're installing and updating your security software. Again, make sure your antivirus software is up to date. Make sure you're utilizing the most up-to-date operating system on your device. So if you use like an Apple, make sure you have the most up-to-date Apple software. Same for Microsoft Office. We're seeing a lot of cybersecurity threats with Microsoft Office products. So make sure you're updating those applications as well. Please encourage your employees to report suspicious online activity and any security warnings to IT. Anytime you think you might have like some weird suspicious email, like go with your gut, report it to your IT department, and they can help determine whether or not this might be a threat. A lot of times companies can actually implement their own phishing campaigns, which is, I think, a really good practice to implement. And so they will actually send out, the company will send out a phishing campaign, and then they will see, well, what employees actually fell for it. You'll want to follow up with any of those employees that did fall victim to those phishing campaigns, and conduct a little bit more cybersecurity training for those individuals. Multi-factor authentication, again, is the best practice for your employees and the devices that you provide, or personal devices. Be wary of business email compromise. Again, we're seeing a lot of emails that are compromised because of using the same password, or you've provided your credentials to someone else. Never provide your credentials in an email. Using malware and antivirus software, log off of your workstations when not in use. And then this is a really important one that I think a lot of organizations can tend to forget. When your employees are separated from employment, make sure you're turning off the access for those employees. Our organization, once you're terminated in our HR system, it terminates access to all of the other systems. So again, that's another great feature about integrating all of your systems with whatever HR platform you utilize at your organization. So not only does it provide role-based access controls, but it also terminates access to all of the systems upon separation of employment. Okay, so in sum, be aware of some common cybersecurity threats that we went through. Again, social engineering is a really common one. Phishing emails, ransomware is on the rise, so just be aware of that. I like to say your informed employee is your best asset, so it's really prudent to train your employees on these best practices. Consider some safeguards that you can implement for your own organization, depending on the size of your organization, what costs seem necessary, depending on the type of data that you have. And then always notify your IT department about any sort of suspicious activity or breaches. Okay, so there's a ton of questions in here. Let me see.
Amber, would you like me to help you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Sure. So the first question is, do you know of a way to stop smishing other than just blocking the numbers?
I have no idea, honestly. I'm getting a lot of them, probably like 3 a week, on like my personal device. I really don't know how to stop them. All I can recommend is just don't click on the links, and I will delete that text message. So remember, your device isn't going to be infected if you open the text message. It's when you click the link that's going to increase that sort of security threat. So yeah, I'm not sure how to stop it from happening, but just don't click on any of those links.
Awesome. And then the next question, I see a lot of people are actually answering this in the chat as well, but do you have any recommendations or best ways to keep track of all your different logins and passwords? And what are your thoughts about iPhones storing passwords for you?
Okay, so LastPass is a good, that's a good company that you can use to store all of your different logins and passwords. They keep all of that information encrypted. So that's one option you can use. You know, again, this is probably not the best advice. You're really not supposed to write down your passwords, but I have like more than a healthy amount of paranoia about cybersecurity. So like I get nervous even doing something like LastPass, but that's just me personally. That is like a best practice that's been recommended though, to keep track of all of those usernames and passwords. And then what was the second part of that question, Joni?
I just asked if it was okay to use their iPhone to store their password. So I'm not sure, you know, what if they were specifying a specific app or where they're saving that on their iPhone. I'm not sure what they meant.
Yeah, I don't save my passwords on anything. Even like, I know it makes it really easy, like through your Gmail. If you have like a Gmail account, you can start tracking your passwords and you can just like auto log in. It makes it really easy. And that's really convenient. I wouldn't recommend storing any passwords on something like that, personally.
Okay. And then instead of transferring data via email, which can inadvertently be sent to the wrong person, shouldn't sensitive data be sent through secure portals? Any thoughts on using secure portals?
Yeah, definitely. If your organization has implemented a secure portal through to like send sensitive information, I recommend that you utilize it. Again, it's just your organization is just going to need to do its own risk assessment and decide based on the systems that you use and the data that you handle, what are the best protective measures to put in place to secure the data. So if your organization has implemented secure portals, definitely recommend doing that. Any other questions?
Yes. Someone asked if we have swipe card access for our office, who should have that access?
Swipe card access. So I'm assuming you mean like badging like in and out of the office. Employees that need to access the facility would need to have swipe card access to enter the office. If you have other third parties entering the workplace, such as like the cleaning crew, yeah, I mean, they would probably need to have that sort of badging access. Just make sure any third parties that you're going to utilize that will be coming onto your premises, you have contracts in place that require background checks of those individuals. So you just want to make sure that the people that are entering your premises, don't have any sort of criminal background.
Awesome. Man, there's a lot of questions for you, Amber.
I know. I love it.
So someone asked, this is Sheila, she asked, sometimes for sites they require 12 characters or symbols. Do you have any recommendations for easily logging into these sites? And I'm assuming this is just really how do you kind of create these passwords to make it easy?
Okay, so here's what I do. I like to use different words. And so it's just kind of like whatever I'm thinking of that day if I need to change a password. So like I live on the beach right now, so like beach, sand, umbrella, and then I'll alternate some of those letters for symbols. So like the E, I'll use the 3, for example, or an A, I'll use the @ symbol. For me, that's been helpful. Just using like a series of words and then trading out some of those letters for numbers and symbols.
Right. And I know from personal experience, if you just search random password generator, or if you use services like LastPass or KeePass, they do actually have that feature as well that will create passwords for you. So, would you be able to speak to the numerous fraudulent unemployment claims that are occurring and how criminals are getting the data when no data breach has occurred?
Wow, that's a great question. What's interesting is my younger sister actually is going through this issue right now. She got an email from her HR department a couple of weeks ago asking if she quit her job because they have an unemployment claim. Yeah, so the process that she's actually going through, because I had never heard of this until then, you can engage a white glove service that can help you, determine what sort of identity theft has occurred. So there are organizations out there that can help you with something like this. I don't know how they're able to do it, but there's some sort of data breach had to have occurred. They had to have known your name, your date of birth, and where you work. So something has been breached. You just may not know about it yet.
Hey. And Gary asked a question. Unfortunately, I can't remember what he was specifying. If you're able to type in chat, please feel free to.
I see his question. I think it might be referring to ransomware. How much money on average do they ask for? I think it varies. It's always going to be in the millions of dollars. But in 2020, ransom demands were at $1.4 billion total. So it's on the rise. It's a significant threat. And yeah, if your company falls victim to it, contact the FBI immediately. We don't, I don't recommend paying the ransom. It just continues to incentivize these sort of crimes, but talk to legal experts and the FBI if that happens to your organization.
Awesome. Wendy Galicia asks, does your company provide an online Zoom cybersecurity training?
My company, no. Nope.
Okay. Would encrypting emails be the same as using secure portals?
Yes. Yeah, because it's going to be secure through transit. So that data is going to be secure. Again, as someone had mentioned earlier, if you send it through an email, you could inadvertently send it to the wrong individual. So that is one downside of using email encryption versus secured portals.
Great. Someone asked, I receive a lot of sales emails at work. Is it better to click unsubscribe or to just block the sender?
Oh, I would probably just block it, because sometimes that's a phishing email. And if you click unsubscribe, you could be downloading malware. So be wary of those, or you could just delete it. But I tend to just delete those emails. And if it's like someone that you like, an organization, so I get a lot of emails about like healthcare stuff. You can click unsubscribe if you trust it, but again, just use your healthy set of paranoia that you've gained through this presentation. I would probably just delete it or block it, but yeah, just be wary of those unsubscribe links. They can subject you to malware.
Awesome. Well, I think those are all the questions. These were really great questions, guys. Awesome. Well, thank you, Amber, so much for this amazing presentation. I think everybody's probably learned a whole lot today. And remember, don't reuse your same passwords.
And don't use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.